What's going on, everybody? I hope everyone is having a fantastic Saturday so far. We're here with a very special guest, NFL veteran, Miami Hurricane, former president of the NFLPA, the one and only Eric Winston. Eric, thank you so much for joining the Scoop, man. We greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Eric, man, it is an honor to have you on. I remember as a kid growing up, in Coral Gables, Florida, going to games at the OB, remembering you as a player, and you have a very interesting Miami Hurricanes career. We'll get into that in a little bit, but, correct me if I'm wrong, you are a Texas guy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Gotta love it, man. Texas forever. How did you cross paths with the University of Miami?
Yeah, it's a somewhat an interesting story, and it's really kind of random, if you will. I didn't grow up a Canes fan, didn't grew up a college football fan, so obviously, seeing their dominance when I was a young kid, and then kind of falling off the map, and then rising back up when I was in high school was apparent because again I grinded college football, loved really college football growing up, so. When I was coming out of high school and even at Miami for my first year, I was a tight end, right? So I was end of the line kind of tight end, and a guy, Bubba Franks, who I'm sure all Canes fans remember and know, and had a great year in the NFL, or a great career in the NFL, is from about 30 minutes away where I'm from in West Texas. So that's not. I mean, he's from a place called Big Spring. I'm from Midland, and I'm in the middle of nowhere, and he's really in the middle of nowhere. So. That Midland's like the big city compared to where he's from. And one of those things where, I knew of him. I didn't know him, but I knew of him. And also a guy named Casey Jones, who a lot of people remember, All-American center in the 90s. He's from Midland. We went to the same high school, and was a guy when I was growing up, when I went to high school football games, my father pointed him out and was like, you should watch this guy. He's a really good player. So, there's some interesting West Texas ties to Miami, and guys that have come out of West Texas to come to Miami have done really, really well. And so there was always that there. So Miami wasn't some foreign place, but at the same time wasn't necessarily on the radar for me. But during that time period, 01, 02 coming out, and really considering myself and thinking of myself as an end of the line tight end, pro style tight end. That was right at the beginning of like the air raid offense, right? So you had Mike Leach that just had come from the offensive coordinator of Oklahoma, now to Texas Tech. Mangino took over as OC at OU and kept the air raid thing going. So if you really think of a West Texas kid, you have OU kind of off the map, right? If you really think of yourself as an end of line tight end, Texas Tech's off the map because you're an end of line tight end. So now the usual suspects start shrinking. And then when I was a kid growing up, I had two favorite colleges, Notre Dame and Texas A&M. And so coming out at that time, if you remember, R.C. Slocum was a long-time head coach at Texas A&M. And they were kind of on their way down, right? They were a perennial 10-win team, really good team, never a great team, but a really good team. And the writing was kind of on the wall. They were a 7-6 kind of team my junior, sophomore year in high school. And quite frankly, just didn't want to go somewhere where I thought, A, the head coach could get fired, because that was the rumor. And then B, I wanted to go somewhere and play with the big games. And then that year, my senior year, Bob Davie at Notre Dame was fired as well. Oh, so, wow. So you have kind of like your two favorite schools growing up, and it's one of those deals where you're like, okay, well, those don't seem like good places for me right now, right? And so that really opened everything up. And if you kind of grow up an A&M fan, you don't really like Texas, right? And I had a college teammate, or a high school teammate, and really a childhood teammate named a guy named Cedric Brenton, God rest his soul, who went to UT. And, we had a lot of talks about UT. He liked it there, but it was funny. I remember one night we were talking. He's like, don't come here. He's like, you won't like it. and what he meant by that is, we had come from a very tough, rugged sort of place in the middle of West Texas. and we had come from a very competitive environment. We won three straight state championships in Texas. It was like the first team to ever do it. Since then, there's been a few more. But it was a very competitive, very rugged place. And I know Miami doesn't sometimes come across that, but if you really know the history, like it's all of that, right? I mean, the legendary practices, the competition. LSU with Nick Saban was kind of percolating out there. And to be honest with you, Miami was the only place that I didn't feel like I was being sold to go to in a weird way, right? And I built up a really good rapport with who was then the offensive coordinator and tight end coach, Rob Shajinsky. And people forget about Rob sometimes, but really good young coach at the time. And he was from Toledo, Ohio, came here to be a tight end, right? And on and on and on. So we had a very similar type of background where we were kind of considering, or he went to Miami from, again, Toledo, Ohio, which in all intents and purposes for this story is Midland, Texas, right? And it was one of those things where we really kind of bonded. We built up a really good rapport. But, and not to toot my own horn, but it was really Mercedes Lewis and I at the time as tight ends coming out in the country of the top two tight ends. And, it was a lot of people promising me a lot of things, not like money or anything, but like playing time and all this. And Miami was really the only place that never promised me anything. And that was sort of where I was from. And that was like sort of what I was about. And I always thought, well, man, I would hate if I was in high school in my senior year and someone was promising the sophomore some playing time and he couldn't play. Right. And I just thought that was just weird. And that's the kind of place I was from. Like, it was like this ultra competitive sort of like you fall in line, you work your butt off. And if you're good enough to play, you play. And that's sort of how Chud kind of presented Miami. And for me, and what I think is kind of somewhat tangential to the story, my family's not from Texas. And so, most Texas kids have this like ultra like, hey, you got to stay in Texas. You got to live in Texas. And so my family not being from Texas, don't get me wrong, I love Texas. But I didn't have this, I always kind of had a wild hair to like, hey, I'd love to leave and hopefully come back. And that all happened, right? Being drafted back to the Texans. But I wasn't like desperate to stay there either. Like I was totally interested in doing something else. And Miami for me was, I just looked at it as like a chance to not only play on a great team and play in all, like it checked all the football boxes, right? And then everything else was like, I was interested in just like growing up and doing something different. And so really at that time and place in my life and really what I was trying to do, I was trying to play in big games, trying to play for the national championship, wanted to be on great teams. It just checked all the boxes, and coming down here, it just got to a point, that it was tough. I mean, the whole recruiting process was really tough on me personally and my family personally. But it just got to a point where I really couldn't sleep at night if this wasn't what I was going to do. You can always go home, right? You can always go home, but I didn't want to live with a way of like, man, I wonder what would happen if I went to Miami. And so that's really kind of how I ended up here.
That's a pretty cool story. You actually get recruited by Rob Shajinsky, who becomes an NFL head coach with the Cleveland Browns, has a great Rappaport resume in the NFL. I mean, to get recruited by a young coach in Rob Shajinsky, I think that's a pretty cool recruiting experience. And, how was that transition? Because, Texas football has a great reputation of being very competitive. But now, like you said, you're coming to the University of Miami, the five-time national champions. How was that transition? Talent-wise, competitiveness coming to Coral Gables from Texas.
It was tough. I was the only guy, and now this is what you do. But I came actually for like 6 to 8 weeks before training camp started because I wanted to play as a freshman, and so I found a place to stay, and I was here for. I trained in the summer session with them, and then I would take a couple hours and then try to learn the offense. So when I was going into camp, I wanted to be ready to roll. And I think obviously that helped me. I think there was two players out of my class, and we were the number one recruiting class in the nation that year. Not that that means anything. But I think it was Greg, 3, and myself were the only 2 guys that did redshirt. I think maybe there might have been 1 more. Everybody else redshirted. And so that helped. But to your point, I mean, nothing's going to prepare you for that jump, right? You can play as good of high school ball as you want in Texas, California, Florida. But coming to Miami was a totally different thing. And then on top of that, too, looking back on it, you know, you have there's like 6 defensive linemen who are now like NFL players. There's 3 linebackers that were all either first-round picks, second-round picks, NFL players. And 3 of the DBs were first-round picks, right? And so you had this situation, and some of it was like ignorance is bliss. Like, I had no idea. And so for me, it was like, I don't know why these guys keep throwing me on my head, but, you know, hopefully I'm getting better. And it really was one of those cases where, man, if you could block Jerome McDougal, if you could block Vince Wilford, if you can block Matt Walters, if you can block these guys, Warren Green, all these guys, the games are going to get pretty easy. And so that really, for me, that training camp still is etched in my mind as like brutal. It's just a brutal, just total rude awakening, because not only are you, it's one thing to learn the offense on a whiteboard. It's another thing to learn the offense when you're actually doing it and walking through it. And also I was playing tight end, but I was also doing all this moving around, right? And so Chud had me trying to play this kind of H-back position. So I was really kind of learning tight end. I was learning kind of fullback, and I was learning like this second tight end stuff, all coming in, never having been in like a pro style offense. So it was fun. It was excruciating. You know, we hit twice a day, and back in then, and against those guys, it was a lot, but it was it got me ready, and to, you know, and obviously things worked out. I played a lot my freshman year, and, you know, obviously ended up transitioning out, but kind of the rest is history there.
What was the weight room transition like for you from high school to the NCAA? What was the difference when you got there your freshman year to Miami?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I look back and I was pretty fortunate. I went, you know, I spent 8 weeks working out with the team, you know, where no other freshman really came down to do that. So that was good. When I was in Midland, you know, I lifted, but I didn't lift like that, right? I mean, it's one of those things where I played a lot of sports. So after football, I played basketball. After basketball, I played baseball. Summer, I played whatever was going on, right? So I never have lifted in that sense. But, you know, we did the power cleans, we did the squats, we did the bench press. I would say the running was the hardest part. The lifting was tough, don't get me wrong, but the runs that we would do were, there was no preparing for some of that. Like, and they would tell me about it, but until you do, and until try to do some of that stuff, it was such a different level. So, yeah, I mean, the weight room definitely had to get stronger. You know, I was a big kid coming in already, and so it definitely helped. But I remember the runs being just a totally different level.
If you could tell a high school offensive lineman recruit one thing about this recruitment process, what would it be? What would be the most important thing they could learn?
About the process, trust your gut, trust your instincts, and you know, everybody thinks I don't know, there's a lot of things I would tell people. Don't read your own press clippings, one of them. You know, all these coaches are going to tell you what you want to hear mostly, and so, you know, and I would say go somewhere that's going to be good for you, not next year, but 3 years from now, 20 years from now too, right? And I think that's important for everybody, and what, you know, have a view that's bigger than just sports is really important, and sometimes I think very overlooked, right? I mean, everybody wants to be told they're going to play as a freshman. Everybody wants to be told, and it's just not possible, right? I mean, yeah, you're going to have some freaks that come in and that can play, but and I'd also say control it much better. I felt like I was obligated to talk to everybody, and I think looking back on it, it just put a lot of stress on myself that year. And instead of really just take a step back and say, let me control what I can right now and deal with that stuff later. I think I let that creep in so early that it just became really difficult.
Eric, walk everyone who's listening right now. How did that decision come up? Transitioning to tight end to offensive tackle. Was it a specific coach that sat you down and said, "Hey, look, Eric, we think in the long run you're going to project a lot better at the offensive tackle position at Miami"?
Yeah.
What really went through that decision, and how hard was it for you as well? Because I'm sure that was not what you expected coming into Miami.
Yeah, it's funny. So that year, and especially the second half of that year, Chud started leaving me in on some pass pro stuff. And during practices, sometimes I'd go down to the offensive linemen and I pass pro them. I pass pro against the defensive linemen, and I was blocking McDougal, Andrew Williams, those guys. And it's funny because I was like, well, I'm just gonna go play basketball, right? I'm just gonna go out there, I'm in my feet, stay in front of him, try not to get run over. That was it. That was like kind of the plan. And I had done punt pro, and I was on punt team, so I was like, oh, it's like punt team. I'll just kick back, and then pitchfork. That was the whole thing. And so that's kind of what I did, and I had some success doing it, which was funny because, and then of course some of the upperclassmen were like, oh, he's going to be a tackle, and I think everybody, listen, I was 6'7", 6'6", 265 as an 18-year-old, right? Like, yeah, probably not that hard to project, right? Like, I think I was probably the only one in denial about it. But I could run and I could do that stuff. And, who knows, if you stay under 270, you can do whatever. And so that was interesting to me. And I started noticing, like, man, I'm having a lot of success blocking some of these guys that, quite frankly, other people are having a lot of problems blocking. And so that was kind of interesting. Obviously, Kellen Winslow had an unbelievable year that year. And I played a lot, but he played a lot and had an unbelievable national championship game. And so during that time, and this was, again, the first time I had really lifted, I was struggling to stay under 270. And that wasn't because I was eating bad or whatever. I was as lean, and I was literally, I had abs showing probably for the first time in my life. And I was struggling to stay under 270. I was doing ab circuit in my dorm room every night. I was eating salads every night. I was doing everything I could because I was like, oh man, if I'm going to be a tight end, I can't be this heavy. But I was just touching weights and putting on muscle and doing what most 18, 19, 20-year-old kids do. Genetics kind of take over. So after that national championship game that year, I was thinking. And so when I came back campus, I'm sure a lot of you guys remember Alonzo Highsmith, who's a great scout, obviously a great player. He was in Coach Swayze's room one of these early on that second semester. And Swayze's like, hey, man, that guy wants to talk to you in there. And so I went in there into his office, and I'd met him before, and I'd known him. He just sat me down. It was like a 2-minute conversation at that. He goes, listen, I watched you play this year, and you did really good. Here's the deal. You could be a second or third string tight end at the NFL, play some special teams, and have a nice little career. He's like, or you could play left tackle and make a ton of money. The choice is yours. And he walked out. And that was literally, and so that combined with already, I was thinking I don't know, maybe I should move the tackle. I can block these guys. Maybe I would have a better career. I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay under 275, 270. How am I going to play tight end? So all of those things were kind of happening at the same time. And plus, I wanted to play. And Kellen was coming back, and obviously Kellen should play. And so, I wanted to play. And so I went and talked to Chud about it eventually, probably within a week. And he was like, listen, I've got all these plans for you. We're going to do 2 tight end sets the whole year. We're going to really make the defensive strain. I've got, don't worry about getting on the field. He's like, but if you think that's something that you want to pursue, let's try it out in the spring. If it doesn't work out, we'll just go back and we won't worry about it. And I said, all right. So we went into spring, and kind of the rest is history. I did well. It was no problem putting on weight. I can tell you that. I just actually started eating. And I was kind of starting left tackle probably midway through spring practice, and just never really gave it up after that. So
Wow.
that's really kind of the story. There's nothing elaborate. There was no coaches that forced me to do it. I kind of saw somewhat of the writing on the wall, and just from that point of view, it was just like, like this is probably something that, just kind of, you don't want to admit it, because I think that it started becoming a little bit ego at the tight end spot. Like, no, I can be a tight end, right? I can show these people. And at some point, you're just like, well, like, who are you really showing at that point if it's bad for you, right? Or bad for your possibly, or not bad, but not the best positive path for your career. So that's it.
No, that's a pretty cool story. Alonzo Highsmith sitting you down and saying, look, you're going to be – he basically nailed it on the head. He called it, right?
Yeah. No, he was right. He was right the whole time.
Do you ever thank him now when you see him?
Oh, yeah. We've had plenty of conversations. What's funny is when he was working for Green Bay, he actually lived in Houston. So I would see him around in Houston some. That was great. And then doing all the PA work, I would see him at the combine and see him other places. So yeah, Alonzo and I have become good friends, and every time I see him, we always end up talking and just catching up.
Who was your mentor in that offensive line position unit, whether it was a coach or player that you kind of looked up to for advice? Because I'm sure there were a lot of, mentally straining, situations you were put in, changing positions, and a lot of room for error and a lot of room for growth. So did you have a mentor in any way, of a player or a coach that really helped you out?
It's a good question. I don't know if I had a guy that was, remember too, when I was my freshman year, Sherko and Bromberg and all of those guys were kind of leaving, right? So they weren't around after I switched, but I stayed up with them. They were good. They were really good to me, and were somewhat mentors there, especially Sherko, having played some tackle, played some guard. Quite frankly, I had to kind of figure it out, and that wasn't the worst thing in the world. Obviously, Keo as an offensive line coach coached and helped a lot, but from that standpoint, I didn't. The best advice I actually got from Chud, and he found a lot of tape from guys that were in the NFL that were built similar to me. The Mark Lepsises of the world. I wouldn't say I'm built like Baselli. Baselli is kind of a freak in itself. But like watching some of these guys and trying to, okay, that's how you do that. That's how you block there. That's how you move. That was helpful too. So just gathering a lot of tape from a lot of people. Watching Bryant McKinney wasn't helpful to me, right? Because Bryant could do all the things I could do, right? And we were just two different athletes, two different players. So from that standpoint, watching a guy like Vernon, Bryant, all great players, not my game, right? That's not who I was. And so really having to kind of go through the film archives and even reach into the pros a little bit was kind of where I ended up finding and kind of teaching myself some things.
Eric, what season did you really start to feel comfortable in college, and why was it? When you were making this big transition, was there a certain year, sophomore, junior year, anything like that, where you really started to feel comfortable at that role?
That's a good question. It's a good question. I would say by the end of my sophomore year, I was feeling pretty good. I had, I had some really good games my sophomore year, and had faced down some really good defensive ends when, quite frankly, I think some of the coaching staff was worried about me, and other people were worried that I don't know if this guy's going to be able to match up with them as a sophomore and just first year playing the position, and et cetera, et cetera. So I felt pretty good there. But it's funny is I look back and I didn't really get to like settle in college, if you will, right? I mean, I transitioned my sophomore year. I feel like I played pretty well. My junior year was really, I thought I was going to be like, man, this is a year I'm going to really dominate. And that fourth game in my junior year, tearing my knee up like I did, obviously hurt. I think long term, maybe, again, I try to take everything as a positive, and I think there was a lot of positives that actually came from that for me, from just a personal standpoint. But, my senior year was really I look back and I'd love to tell you I was 100%. I wasn't, and it probably wasn't until my rookie year. So if you really like think about where I was super comfortable about playing tackle, wasn't probably until my like end of my second, third year in the NFL, because that was finally when I had I played a bunch of consecutive games healthy and had settled into a position and had got a lot of reps in. So looking back on it, it's actually a really good question. I've never thought of it that way, but I don't know that I was comfortable, but I was never felt like I was at the top of my game, maybe when I was at Miami.
What do you feel is the most important thing for a college offensive lineman to learn or try to master before they make the jump into the NFL?
I would say feet technique, footwork technique, that stuff I think is critical. I would also say this: there's a plague, in my opinion, going around of offensive linemen that are way too heavy, way too young. There's so many guys that think they need to be 300 pounds in high school. I was 265 in high school. I had no problem getting to 300, and I did it naturally, kind of coming up. And naturally meaning like, just lifted an 8 and like you're going to get bigger because you're getting older and you're coming into a different set of like maturity. I know plenty of guys that were 285 in high school. All of that, right? Like that's the thing is I think there's a whole thing coming of guys coming up. You said about kind of more recruiting, but if I talk to high school kids, I always tell them, do not try to put on weight. If you're 285, you're fine. Like that is fine. Like you will easily be 310 by your second year in college, by lifting, by eating, all of that, by just growing, maturity, all of that, you'll grow. And I actually think it leads to a lot of injuries. I think a lot of these kids are not strong enough to carry that weight and play. So that's kind of one thing there. But from it, I would say work on your foot quickness. You can always add strength, but there's so many guys that if you don't add to your foot quickness, you will never you'll never make it, because I don't care how strong you are. I don't care how mean you are or whatever. If you can't move your feet and stay with the athletic defensive ends and defensive linemen, you can't play. It's as simple as that. So you can't play. So there's so many guys worried about the bench press, worried about squatting, all good stuff. But like if you can't move your feet, nobody cares. And that's the one thing I would tell a lot of college guys is lose some weight and move your feet.
Eric, throughout your career at the University of Miami, I'm sure it was a roller coaster ride. You were at the national title game. You win the Orange Bowl. Brock Berlin is your quarterback. You transition to Kyle Wright. What was your favorite memory playing for the University of Miami?
Man. I'll never forget. I mean, listen, we lost the national championship game against Ohio State, but that scene, I don't know if I've ever played in a game like that. I mean, it was really an indelible game in every level that I've ever played. Both Florida games in a lot of ways, that my freshman year going to the swamp and crushing them, that was a great atmosphere. But that next game, the next year, where we came back from like 23 down in the fourth to beat them, was an insane game. Going 4-1 against Florida State, really screwing it off on that fumbled field goal to not at least tie it. Really, we were on the 1 yard line. We should have won the game there. It shouldn't even been a field goal. Those are all beating Florida State in the Orange Bowl, that kind of stuff. Like, I wish I could tell you VTech at VTech. I mean, there's so many games that were just. That's why I came to Miami to play in those games. And at Tennessee, my freshman year was 110,000 at Neyland Stadium. It's hard to pick one because it's like it was yesterday. I can tell you exactly some of the plays. I can tell you all of that stuff. Like it really was like that was why I went there, and it was really cool to really see that fulfilled.
Eric, that time period you played in. It was during Larry Coker's tenure. As a fan who's watched the University of Miami play, you go from national title, you go from Orange Bowl, I think then you go to Peach Bowl after. It kind of goes kind of down one, if that makes sense, every single season. What do you think happened during that time span? Maybe it was leadership amongst the players, no leaders. Maybe, there was, coaching kind of fell apart towards the end. What do you think? Because you lived it, you played it. I was just a spectator. I'm watching from the stands, and we have our opinion. But, what do you think? What really happened?
So first and foremost, as kind of a leader towards the end, I'll take responsibility for a lot of that. You gotta find a way to win more games. You gotta find a way to make sure the guys are ready to play. And quite frankly, as a captain on that team, we didn't get it done. I mean, even though 9-3 is not an awful year, it's not exactly what I think we all came to Miami for. I think from a macro standpoint, I think there was two big things that happened that I think kind of caused some of that slide. One, I think, and this is not to bang on Paul D, but it's one of those things where I think the game changed and nobody was paying attention. Meaning that you had an arms race that was starting, right? And I remember this now looking back, recruiting wise, and it wasn't all the way there, but you were getting close, right? You had Texas starting to flaunt their facilities. You had LSU starting, and it wasn't as overt, but it was a little bit more of, hey, not Miami specifically, but a lot of other places don't nearly treat the guys the way we treat them. And we have all of these facilities. You stay in these dorms. You eat at these facilities. This is the Shangri-La. That's the Hampton Inn, right? So there was an arms race kicking off, and when we were either playing for national championships, winning national championships, I don't know that we really did anything to fundraise and to see that trend starting to happen, right? It took Mark Richt making a $2 million donation to get a damn indoor, right? It took so much of that to get. I mean, when I was there, I think we had the smallest training room, not only in the ACC, but I think of 10 in the country or something like that. We shared it with all the others. Nobody else did that, right? And I think a lot of us didn't care about that stuff that came to Miami, but that kind of brings it to the second point is those star players that when I came in, very few of them were 5-star players, right? So very few of them were, Sean Taylor, 2-star player. Andre Johnson, I'm not familiar, but I don't think he was the end all to be all, right? Ed Reeds of the world. There were a lot of hungry guys that came in. And what Miami and Butch Davis and Coker, because he was there too, did well is they projected a lot because they had to, right? And then when you get to the mountaintop and you have your choice of players, you stop projecting and I think you start relying on 4 stars, right? Oh, we can get anybody we want. And I'll give you a perfect example. That year we had great from rivals recruiting class, and a lot of these guys were good players, but we turned down San Antonio Holmes, right? We let him go to Ohio State. Why? Because he didn't run fast, right? Well, he ran 4.6, and it's well, did he catch the ball well? What was his ball skills like? So I think we got, and I think we, as in everybody, coaches, everybody, got a little, started reading our press clippings a little bit and said, well, wait a minute, what really got us here? It wasn't the 5 and 4 stars. It was bringing in the hungry guys that projected really well. And I'm not saying, hey, listen, you can go get a stud, go get DJ Williams, right? There's no problem. There's no issue going and getting DJ Williams, right? And not all of them are going to pan out. That happens. But I do think that we went and got a lot of guys that for whatever reason didn't work out. And they were really well regarded. They were really well. And I think we stopped projecting and started taking final products. And when you're a final product, when you're 18 years old, when you're 22, things are going to probably pass you by, right? And so and why did we start missing out on some of those guys? Well, you really look back on some of those classes and you start seeing the leakage from South Florida, right? You start seeing, man, there's 3 guys now going to Auburn, right? Or there's 2 guys going to LSU. It used to only be 1, right? And so now you started seeing, wow, man, all these guys are starting to go to Florida now, right? That's weird. All these guys are going to Florida State from South Florida, where we never used to lose that many guys. So you saw, again, all of that, and I say that not to blame one thing. I say that as in that's a those were two like perfect storms starting to hit each other. Right? Was you didn't keep up with the arms race, and then on top of that, you started taking guys that I think were a little bit out of your ethos, and then it matched what you were trying to do. And on top of that, the guys I think too that you were supposed to get that we would always have gotten started not coming. And you start seeing that trend happening, and then you start losing, then it becomes harder to fundraise, harder to get the guys that you were supposed to get. And it goes downhill. To your point too, I also thought, when Rob Chajinski and Randy Shannon were coordinators, they really, I always say this about coaching staffs. It's a puzzle, right? Your head coach will have his personality, right? Butch Davis and Larry Coker were very different from each other. And both of those win, right? Like both of those personalities can win. But you have to have assistants that are the yin to your yang, right? And Chud and Randy were the perfect yin to Coker's yang. They were the ones that ran the joint, right? And I don't mean that like Coker could run it. He was more, he could stay in his personality and run things where those guys could be the enforcers. When Chud left, you started seeing some of that enforcing really start leveling down a little bit. Again, all of this is to say that it's not one thing. It was a ton of things. And again, I'll come back to someone like myself of not being able to hold some of that together.
Eric, I'm kind of curious. One of the topics that comes up often, especially in recruiting for offensive linemen, is in coming into college, is about how there's kind of an overall lack of talent on the offensive line compared to the defensive line. One of the theories is the bigger athletic guys in high school automatically are getting transitioned to the defensive line more than they are to the offensive line. How do you feel about that? What do you think plays a role in that?
Honestly, the coaching in South Florida on the offensive lineman is bad. It's really bad. And a lot of kids also too, a lot of kids don't start playing until 9th or 10th grade, which isn't the worst thing in the world. But if you combine that with bad coaching, you come in pretty far behind. Now that might have changed in the last probably 20 years, right? So I haven't been around. So maybe the technical stuff, but that's not my opinion. That's what all the guys from South Florida would tell me, is that the coach was like, yeah, he's not even a full-time coach. He comes over and does that. Like, if you come from Texas, those are full-time coaches, right? And you learn how to get your stance when you're 6, right? Like, so when you're taking a kid from South Florida on the offensive line, I remember plenty of guys came in and we had to start from the beginning. How do you get your stance, right? Where's the weight shifted? So some of these things that you would assume would be like table stakes, they weren't. And so you really have to start with the beginning with a lot of these guys, right? And so I think that's part of it. I also think, too, to your point, there's probably a glamour thing. If you're a good athlete and you can play and you can run, your ass wants to be on the defensive line. You want to go hit the quarterback, right? So there's some of that, too, that I'm sure plays into this. And it's not just the coaching. And I don't want to bang on the coaching because I'm not that familiar with it. But that was always what I was told. And if you really think about our really good teams, like look where the offensive linemen were from. They weren't from Florida, right? Like Bryant McKinney, Devla, Romberg, Shurko. I think Joaquin was the one guy on that 2001 starting offensive line that was from Miami. Everybody else was not even from Florida. You look back further, you have some of that. Again, that doesn't always hold, and there's always great athletes that come out of here. Vernon Carey's, but Vernon would tell you the same thing. Vernon's like, I had to learn how to play offensive line when I came here. I didn't know. And so that's there's always exceptions to that, but I think that's a big issue for especially South Florida kids. Is that I think some of the coaching there isn't great on the offensive line, and I think that kind of hurts. Now maybe that's changed in the last 10 years. I don't know.
You had this amazing college career. You started to develop as an offensive lineman. You started to really show that you had NFL upside. What was the NFL draft experience like for you? Could you kind of walk us through maybe some of the emotions you had and some of the things you went through?
Surprisingly, just as bad as probably recruiting. It's it's one of those things where nobody tells you the truth. It's really strange. You have a lot of coaches and a lot of front office people that sort of blatantly lie to you, and you don't realize it until after the fact, when they don't even have to. Like, if you're a college coach, you're trying to get the kid to come. So, there's a certain level of like, well, maybe that's over the line, maybe that's not. But like, I get it. They hold all the cards, but yet they still tell you they're going to take you at the 20th pick, the 25th pick, the 26th pick. And then not only do you pass them once, but you pass them twice, and you don't take them. So either you had really no authority in talking about it, or it's just not the truth, right? And so that happened quite a bit. You don't know what to believe. Like, you really don't. You have no idea what to believe. People tell you, you see the ESPN stuff. The teams are just as bad. I mean, I have plenty of teams. I'm taking you at the end of the first round. If you're there early in the second, we're going to snatch you up. Plenty of those teams. Like, I can tell you exactly who they were. I still remember it. And then when that doesn't happen, you're like, it's not that adds. You're disappointed, but that adds to the disappointment because you're dumb enough to tell your friends, oh, this is what they're telling me, right? Like, so not only like are you disappointed because you're not going where you thought you're going, you're also embarrassed because you told everybody that they told you that that's where you're going, right? And so it's kind of twofold on that. But it is what it is. I'll be honest with you. I couldn't have been more happy, looking back on it, to end up where I ended up. I ended up in a perfect place. Gary Kubiak, or a young team, a team that wanted to get younger, so there was going to be opportunity there. I needed a half a year to develop. I was a half a year. I ended up getting a half a year and got thrown in because of an injury. And it was really it was a perfect place. The outside zone scheme made my career. If I went to the Giants and was a power player, would I have played? Yeah, I would have been fine. But that made my career. So again, things happen for a reason. Just like my knee injury, there were some really good things that came from it. I was a better person because of it. And it is all well that ends well. And like I said, I landed in the right spot.
Eric, you also took on a very vital role in the NFL. Not a lot of people, want to take on because of such of a high responsibility. And there's a lot of pressure as well. You were the president of the NFLPA. What made you want to become the president and represent, the NFL players?
I didn't, and I still don't. I'm just joking. So my first year in Houston, a mentor of mine, a guy named Mark Bruner, who played 14 years in the league, was a first-round pick tight end to the Steelers, and was ending his career in Houston, became somewhat of a mentor of mine. And he was a vice president of the union, meaning he was on the executive committee. So the structure is each team has a representative that's voted on by the players in the locker room. And then those 32 representatives vote an executive committee of 10 vice presidents and one president. And so he was one of those vice presidents and was heavily involved. And when we were working out, I would always pepper him with questions, right? And anybody that knows me knows that, I can run my mouth with the best of them. And so, why is it like this? Why do we do that? Help me understand this. And coming from West Texas, I have no idea what a union is, right? Like, I've never heard of them, not a part of the culture out there, no idea what they are, right? And so it was one of those things where he was finally just like, Eric, come to a meeting, ask your questions at the meeting. I'm tired of answering them, right? And so, you come to a meeting and then at the team meetings, ask my questions. And then it was one of those things like, hey, come to the big meeting in March. And this is where all the other reps are coming in and ask your questions there. And it was just one of those places where it was like, man, this was a group of like-minded guys. It was a ton of O-line guys, right? So the Jeff Saturdays, Kevin Mawais, Steve Hutchinson's, a lot of very similar guys that I, quite frankly, looked up to and idolized. But they had one thing in mind. They just wanted to leave it a little bit better than they found it, right? And that's sort of how I've always been. Like, I've always tried to help the rookies, always tried to help the freshmen when I was a senior, always, looked out for guys, always wanted the best for them, always wanted them to have a little bit better than I had it. That's just always been something that I've just been about. And with the union and doing that, it wasn't about being president. It wasn't about running things or making decisions. It was just about helping. And I found a place there where like people thought I had a couple of decent ideas and that I was willing to put time in when maybe some other people just didn't have it or didn't want to. And I was willing to kind of do things and lend my voice to things that I was passionate about, but B, that I thought were good for my fellow players and the guys that were going to come after me. And so I was the team rep in 2 different places. I never angled to have the job. I never asked. I never was like, hey, what about me? We had a ton of older guys circling off PC, and because it's an active player's role. Once you're done playing, you end your term and you move off. And so we had a really funky thing where we had, out of the 11 guys, like 8 guys left, including the president. And a couple of the old guys said, hey, listen, we think it's you. And we want to leave it a little bit better than we found it. And we trust that you're going to do that. And that was really it. I didn't make posters. I didn't campaign. I didn't do any of that. I was nominated by Matt Hasselbeck. And I said yes. Because I said, that's what I said. Listen, if someone nominates me, I'll say yes. If they don't, I'm not going around trying to get someone to nominate me. And I made a little speech, and the guys voted me in, and that was it. That's as simple as it is, because it's not like politics. It's not something you run for. It's not something you angle for. If I didn't get it, I'd have kept doing what I was doing and been on the agent committee and the finance committee and done that, because that's really all I cared about. And when they asked me to do that, my first question was, well, what kind of decisions can I make? And they were like, well, you kind of have to make them all. And I was like, okay, well, then if you're telling me I can help more from this position, then I want to go help more. But that's it. Like, it was never about, I got put in a lot of positions where probably, unfortunately, my name was in the news because of it. But that was never part of it. That was never anything I cared about. It was just about helping you guys.
Any decisions that you made happen that you're proud of during your time as president?
Listen, that last CBA was brutal. It was tough. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what we did for the former players. I'm proud of the money the guys are going to get now. I'm proud of the benefits. You don't get everything in these negotiations. Obviously, we had to give up a few things. So that will always kind of be there. I'm proud of the work we did around financial literacy and a lot of the curriculum we built around financial literacy, the regulations we put around financial advisors, all of those things I'm super proud of. The progress we made around health and safety, the Harvard study. I mean, it goes on and on. We did a lot, and we had a lot of fights. And I'd be lying to you if it wasn't, sometimes I wasn't, kind of itching for a fight every now and then. That's kind of who I am. But at the same time, we did a lot of good. And I look back, and I was a part of that. I wasn't the tip of the spear. That wasn't me. There was a team. And the team got a lot done because we all were in it together. And that's it. And I'm proud of what the team did. And JC Treader, who I passed the baton to, is carrying that tradition on. I left it a little bit better than I found it for him, and he's going to do it for the next guy. And that's really it.
Eric, was there anything that happened during your rookie season in the NFL that kind of surprised you? Anything that caught you off guard that you might not have been expecting?
Yeah, everything. It is a huge difference. And it's not so much on the field. It is on the field, but the mental game is so much more in depth. The interactions between the players and the coaches are so different. It's not the traditional yelling and screaming. It's much more of a personal, not a personal relationship, but much more of a relationship where we're the same level. There's not as much of a hierarchy there. So a lot of that stuff, and again, being in a locker room with guys that were 10, 11 years older than you, that had 3 kids at the house, that were living a very different life than you were. All of that was incredibly strange, like way different. But I learned a lot from those guys, and I had my eyes open and learned how to be a professional. And that was the tough part, was like understanding what that took to be a professional, and really honing it in and really like living it. And that's what really, it's not the skills, it's that stuff that makes or breaks whether you're going to be good or not. And being a professional and learning what that means and living that every day is the thing that separates the good talented players from the guys that don't last very long.
You know, you often hear about NFL rookies say that they have a welcome to the NFL moment. Did you experience any of that during your NFL season on the field?
Yeah, I'll tell you a pretty funny story. Can you cuss on this thing, or are you not supposed to?
No, go for it. Absolutely.
Okay. So this is like, we're like 4 OTAs in. Now, this is like a completely new offense, for everybody. So this is new coaches. So the vets that were there, this is still a new offense. And we're installing the outside zone. And I won't name names here because I'm sure, I don't know if this would be embarrassing. I don't think it'd be embarrassing for anybody. But one of the guys that played in the offensive line was a long-term vet in the league. This was like his 13th year. He had won the Allen Trophy in college. I mean, this guy's a good player. And one of the coaches, he didn't go far enough on his reach block on an outside zone, and that one of the coaches just started screaming at him. And I was like, oh, it's normal. And the guy came back to me and he looked right at me and goes, is he yelling at me? And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I was like, you might have to take it up with him. Like, I don't know. And then it happened again. And he's like, I think he's yelling at me. And I was like, I'm going to say something to him. He's like, you can't talk to me that way. And I was like, all right, man, do you think? Like, whatever. And sure enough, like the next day, he doesn't go far enough. And this coach, like, God damn it, get your, F and head, get it outside. And the guy walks right up to the coach. And this is right in front of me. And he looks at him dead in the eye and goes, if you ever fucking talk to me like that again, I'll kill you. And walks off. And I was sitting there and I was like, and that was it. That was like, that's the welcome to the NFL. And that was the difference that I was like, I am not in Kansas anymore. Like, this is a totally different thing. And I'll never forget that. That is like my thing where I was like, it was insane. It really was. To this day, I still tell that story because, to your point, it was like that was the welcome to the NFL. Like, was holy cow, this is a bit of a different beast.
Hey, Eric, do you still keep in contact with the University of Miami football program?
Somewhat. Listen, I played 12 years in the NFL. I think I got down for maybe 2 games. Have 3 kids, all playing sports, all doing stuff. At that age where they're competing, I just have a thing. I don't miss their stuff, and so, do I talk to Coach Diaz every now and then? Yes, and have built up a good rapport with our current offensive line coach, Coach Justice, but. To say that I'm like down here a lot or doing, at Miami events, unfortunately not right now. I'd love, down the road here, maybe when the kids get older, start coming back to more games, start being around a little bit more, all of that. I'd love to do that, but that's just not in the cards right now. I think now that I'm retired and now hopefully COVID's on its way out, fingers crossed, that, I'd like to start making it a point to get down there for at least a game a year, or, I live outside of DC now. So, if they're up at VTech or up at Virginia or whatever, start making some of those games.
John Kennedy, $5 donation. Before we let Eric go, he asked a question. I think it's a fairly good question. Who do you think is the greatest of all time, Sean Taylor or Ed Reed, respectfully?
Obviously Ed had an amazing professional career, and Sean's sadly cut short. I think they're both Hall of Fame players. I mean, I think they're both collegiate Hall of Fame players if they're not already. And then I think Sean and Kellen both were Hall of Fame players. Obviously, Sean passed, and Kellen kind of ruined his knee. Or I think they both would have been in the Hall of Fame as well. There's no doubt in my mind. And Sean, you could see that was well on his way to doing that. Really, two different players if you think about it. And I'm not completely different, but Sean brought much more of a physicality to the free safety position that I don't think a lot of people had seen. And he had the athletic ability to play free safety, and yet invert and get in the box and make tackles and to hit and blitz and to make plays. Ed was much more of the center fielder, free safety. Just nobody had instincts like him. There were just nobody had those. If the ball was tipped and went in the air, you knew Ed Reed not only was catching it, but he was catching it running full speed going the other direction. That was just it. And so, it's impossible to say. Maybe you go with that if you like more of the free safety type. If you like the bigger, more probably have a little bit more flexibility, you go with Sean. But John, I would tell you that you're just splitting hairs at this point, right? I mean, I always tell people what's the difference between Tom Brady and Peyton Manning? Who cares, right? They're both insane, right? It's both such a level that few will ever breathe that rarefied air. That it's who cares? Enjoy both of them for what they were and are, and it was just awesome seeing it.
Ross, you got any other questions for Eric before we let him go?
Yeah, I just got one final question for you, Eric, and I'm kind of curious. When you got into the NFL, who do you feel was the toughest battle for you on the defensive line? Who did you really go to war with in the NFL?
All of them. It's NFL. All of them. No. Robert Mathis in Indianapolis was brutal to play. It's simply because there's nobody else like him. I mean, he was kind of that 6'3", 250 type defensive end before there was any. Right now, you see some guys out there that are willing to play small. Indy was willing to play small before anybody was playing small, and you had Freeney on the other side too, which was, thank God I didn't have to block him a lot, even though I caught him a couple of times, and that was brutal. But Mathis was so tough because he was so fast. He had so many good moves, but it was so hard to practice against that. It's like getting ready for a knuckleballer in a way, because how do you prepare for that? That was really tough. Javon Curse early on was at Tennessee. That was not a fun day. So many guys through the years. That Aaron Smith at Pittsburgh, playing him as a young player, that was humbling. Really understanding and learning about what it meant to try to block a two-gap defensive end. I mean, he was insanely good player, very underrated player in the history of the NFL. Aaron Smith made that defense go. Him and Casey Hampton made that defense go. They were unbelievable up front. So, there's guys like that stand out. I mean, you could probably start naming some. I'm sure I'm missing a couple of guys I played against. Every now and then, you got a guys beat almost, and so there were some good players that I didn't mind playing against because for whatever reason I kind of had their beat. But man, playing Robert, playing Javon early on, Kyle Vanden Bosch was there. Just those guys were so good. I mean, I was on the same team with Watt and played against them. I mean, unbelievable player. Those guys were just a different level. I mean, Von Miller early on had some really good games against him, but it was hold on to your ass every single play, and it was just that tough. And so, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of them. I could go down a list probably, but those guys definitely stand out.
Well, Eric, it was a privilege and an honor to have you on the Scoop. We greatly appreciate your time, and I think you truly do represent the University of Miami and everything that is upheld to the Miami standards. So thank you for your time at the University of Miami, and thank you for your time on The Scoop.
Guys, thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, Eric. Have a great rest of your day. All right.